morning. My name is Sister RoseAnn, and I will be your substitute teacher for high school poetry. As I understand, you all have been talking about Latinos in poetry. Well, today we're going to be talking about the life of Javier Zamora. And here's a picture of him. Who is Javier Zamora? What is his story? Well, Javier Zamora's story is this: a boy's journey from El Salvador to California. It all starts in the time right after the Salvadorian Civil War from 1980 to 1992. When Javier was 1 year old, his father left to the United States. When he was close to 5 years old, his mother left to the United States. So Javier was raised by his grandparents, mainly his grandmother. It was when Javier turned 9 years old that his grandfather and Javier took a bus to Guatemala. When they got to Guatemala, they were there about a couple of weeks or so, and the grandfather said, "I am going to go back." So he went back to El Salvador, and Javier continued on with the coyote and a group of people. Now, what is a coyote? A coyote is a person who is paid to take a person or a group of people to cross the border to the United States or to a designated area. So, when they left, the group left, they got on a boat and went from the Guatemalan border to Oaxaca. When they got to Oaxaca, the coyote, who was the guide, deserted them. So Javier ended up going with a group of people and followed them to go to journey to the United States. They continued from Oaxaca all the way to Mexico to the Sonoran Desert, and they continued and they crossed the border in Arizona in the Sonoran Desert from June the 10th, 1999. But right when one of the nights that they were there in that desert, they were all sleeping together. There were about 40 of them. There are several poems that Javier does, and he writes it in a book called Unaccompanied. And this book has all of the poems, or most of the poems, that he has done that expresses how what he went through in his life and so forth during his journey from El Salvador to California. So one of the poems is called Second Attempt Crossing. Second Attempt Crossing is dedicated to a friend of his that he met called El Chino. El Chino was a gang member who was a young boy, just as Javier, a little bit older, who was fleeing from the gangs. He didn't want to be in the gang anymore, so he decided he wanted to leave. So he was in the group. In this poem, they use as a metaphor a herd, because the group took care of each other. They protected each other. They helped each other as they journeyed across the Sonoran Desert and other places. Well, as they were sleeping, one person yells out, "La migra!" And it's like they jump up, they run around and this and that, and Javier ends up in the dirt by himself. Everyone abandons him except his friend, El Chino, comes back for him. He comes back and Javier jumps on his back and they're running and they're going, and all of a sudden the migra is what is the border patrol. So the border patrol that gets out their guns, and Javier is nervous and he tells El Chino, "Párate." Now, "párate" means stop, because he's scared that they're going to shoot at him. So El Chino stops, and the border patrol comes and starts beating him up. So what he does is he gets Javier from his back, puts him underneath him to protect him so he doesn't get hurt or beat up. Then after all this goes on, it finishes and so forth. The next thing it says in the poem is that they go their separate ways. El Chino goes this way towards Virginia, and Javier goes towards San Francisco, California. El Chino does have a phone number to be in contact with Javier to see how he's doing. So he calls Javier at least twice a month to see how he is. Well, one month, his cousin, El Chino's cousin, calls Javier and says, well, it ends up that the gang, who his friend El Chino was fleeing from, caught up to him in Alexandria and they killed him. So this is a time when Javier is really sad, and later on, he ends up writing this poem, Second Attempt Crossing, and it's dedicated to El Chino because it was El Chino who protected him and was his friend and saved him from harm. And so many of the poems that Javier writes is later on in a book called The Accompanied. And in this book, it has a lot of poems that Javier expresses his emotions and how he feels and his traumas and his life while while he journeys from El Salvador all the way to California and so forth. Well, Javier, as I had mentioned earlier, he ends up coming to the United States on June the 10th, 1999. Now, Javier has mixed feelings about coming to the United States. Why? Because he doesn't feel like he's from one place or another. He feels sad because he left his home. He doesn't feel comfortable because he's not even documented. He's undocumented. He's not a citizen of the United States. And then his friends later on, they consider him, like, oh, he's like they call him a coconut, making fun of him because he's brown, but yet he's white inside. So from either place, he doesn't feel comfortable and so forth. Well, it ends up that Javier gets a scholarship because he plays real good soccer, and he ends up, well, even in high school, when he was in high school, your age, matter of fact, he was introduced with poetry, and they had asked him to write some poetry, a story type. And he does. He writes, I think it's called Mi Tierra, and it talks about his land in El Salvador where he lived. So this is the time he becomes introduced to poetry. He ends up liking poetry because for him, it's a way to cope with what he's going through, cope through his traumas, cope through how he feels and what he felt and so forth. So it ends up that he really enjoys doing this poetry because it's like it's an outlet to his feelings. Later on, he goes to college. He gets a BA from the University of California in Berkeley. He ends up getting his, I think it's his MFA as well. And he gets a lot of, once he continues writing poetry and so forth, he gets a lot of accomplishments, a lot of awards and so forth. Right now, Javier lives in Harlem in New York, and he's working on his memoirs and another selection of collected poems about the immigration crisis. So Zamora wishes, he gives a voice to the people who don't have a voice, because all that he had gone through, he saw a lot of people who have died. He's seen a lot of people who have been mistreated and so forth. So a lot of all of his poems that he's written in his first collection, a book that was called Unaccompanied, that was done in 2017 in September, he writes about all that he has gone through and everything and so forth. So this is just a little bit about Javier Zamora, and hopefully you all will continue learning more about different poets, because there's so many poets out there and all different kinds of writings that they do. Some poets write like Javier from what he has gone through and so forth. Some poets write of imagery. Some poets write of like experiences like he has. some poets, I mean, there's all just all different kinds of writings. There's prose, there's um, there oh gosh, I just can't think of it at the moment right now. But there's just all different kinds. Do your research, and for we have the weekend. Your homework is to look up a poet, another poet, a Latino poet, like we did with Javier, and give and do a paper on it. And in our next class, we will take turns and discuss which poet you picked and what is his life story about and what kind of poetry did he do. Okay? Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. Bye bye.